Thanks, Mike. Uh, well, we're having a little technical difficulty here, so let's problem solve here. Um, while Grant's doing that, boy, what an honor to follow Coach Hoffman. Um, my first college job was at SNU too, so we got some ties. When I came on campus there, he was a living legend. So at least you get to hear from one Hall of Famer, and it's not me today. But what an awesome guy. Listen, I'm just going to talk about a couple of different things that are happening in and around the world of college athletics and name, image, and likeness. And if we get the slides working, great. If not, then I can wing it because I've done this a couple of times here. As Mike mentioned, we've been partnering. Thank you, Grant. I appreciate your help. We've been partnering with the OSSA for several years now on all things NIL and recruiting. And today I just want to give you a little bit of insight on the absolute chaos that is happening right now and a little bit of perspective on kind of what we're seeing. And I'm going to go a little quick to kind of make up some time. So, boy, I mean, how many of you guys are on Twitter today? I mean, like few announcements going around. It's absolutely nuts out there, and some of that's really cool and exciting, and there's some really interesting opportunities. But boy, is it changing super fast! Like every time that Mike and I get on the phone or have a conversation, it feels like the whole world is turned around in this world. Okay. And so today, again, we're going to talk a little bit about NIL and give some context to that. But we're also going to talk about how it's changing recruiting and give you guys a perspective. I get a lot of ADs and asking me, come in and let's talk about recruiting and how it's changing and what our coaches can do and what are the implications to that. Let me start with a couple of fun things. I did this last year to give a little bit of perspective. How many of you, and we're just going to be a little silly here for a couple of minutes just to kind of do a little bit of an icebreaker here. How many of you are on some social media platform? Okay. How many of you are on Facebook? That's for old people. Okay, Facebook. How many of you are on TikTok? Are you on TikTok? Okay, you guys are psychos. Okay. How many of you are on Instagram? Okay. How many of you are on X or Twitter? Okay. How many of you wear a pair of Jordans or own a pair of Jordans sneakers? Okay, cool. How many of you had I'm going to pick on a couple of people. Coach, who was your favorite player when you were growing up? Who were you a fan of? What player? Any sport? Do you have a favorite athlete? You got to kind of play along, or this doesn't go very far. Michael Jordan. Thank you. Okay, I was going to say just pick somebody. Okay. All right. Anybody have Jordan? Okay. Anybody else have a favorite player when they were growing up?
Yeah, I'm old. Mickey Mantle.
Mickey Mantle. That's a great one. Okay. All right. So I'm 48 years old, and my favorite player was Brian Bosworth. I love the Boz. Okay. He's had his ups and downs in life, haven't we all? But I love the Boz. Okay. Think about how much money that dude would have made in the world of NIL. Okay. Now, I use all that to say the Jordan, okay, that is someone's likeness, okay? He's doing his thing in the air, right? That's his brand. That's his likeness, right? That is the Jordan brand is NIL. That's really what we were going down the path of. And then our friends in the college athletics have kind of mucked it all up. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. All right, so what's happening today? This is what's creating the chaos. So I'm going to try to move around here a little bit. You're seeing employment groups out there. You're seeing a lot of attorneys. You're seeing the NCAA. You're seeing the National Labor Board. You're seeing high school athletic associations. The quote, billable hours never loses is absolutely a very real thing because attorneys have absolutely pounced on what's happening in and around this because the veil and the changing language that the Supreme Court has determined around amateurism is evolving. And that veil changed in college in 2021, and it's obviously been a crescendo down into the high school space. And this is what Grant and Mike and others, they're kind of dealing with, kind of the changing legislation that's kind of around them, okay? So this is the chaos that is kind of dealing around you, above you, however you want to describe that. All right, so what's happened? This may be a little hard for some of you guys in the back here, but if you go back several years and we think about NIL and now we're getting into revenue sharing, if you didn't see today, the roster sizes got capped in Division I, but also scholarships expanded. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. That affects a lot of your kids, and it'll have some really good opportunities, and it'll have some pretty negative opportunities if you really think through that. But if you think about the last 10 years, the changing dynamic of that, it all kind of stems from a court case with Ed O'Bannon. Anybody know who Ed O'Bannon is? Okay. Played hoops at UCLA. Guy raised his hand. You must be a Bruin fan. Okay. So before I go there, how many of you played the NCAA football game? Anybody played NCAA football games? Okay, you guys are psycho too. All right. So I'm just kidding. I heard it's really cool. I want to go buy it. So it all stems off of that. Ed O'Bannon was a 6'7", left-handed basketball player from UCLA, wore the number 31. Kind of unique, right? Not a lot of people wearing 31. Big guy, left-handed, very good basketball team. He sued EA because they used his likeness in the video game. He wanted a piece of the pie. And candidly, I really can't blame him. Now, what has happened out of that, the unintended consequences, is really that the NCAA has just been sued and sued and sued and sued. And so our federal government has basically said, can't do that. You're breaking antitrust rules. Like, the language around this is evolving. And listen, I would love to go back to old school, and I love that. That's how I was raised. But like, ducking our head and walking away from it isn't going to do anybody any good, because that ship is sailing. Okay? So we fast forward, and I'm going to try to speed up since Coach Hoffman took all my good time today, but that was awesome, by the way. He was great, and he is an absolute legend. You fast forward to, there's more things on this list as we go from left to right. It's because it's speeding up, which means it's changing. So you come out of 2019, we've kind of still dealing with some of this. What is the NCAA going to do with NIL? What's that going to look like? In 2021, July of 2021, the NCAA said, yep, you can do it. Kind of overnight, with no policy and no rules and no governance and no guidelines, just an interim policy, and said, have at it. And what's happened is that created a whole bunch of chaos that some of you guys are dealing with and some of you haven't dealt with. Around the same time, they opened up the one-time transfer exemption at the NCAA, which again impacts what Mike and Grant and everybody else is dealing with now with Rule 8 in the high school space, which is the federal court has said, hey, you've got to open up the restrictions for player movement. Okay? So again, I talk a lot about college because it has a lot of implications on the high school market today. Okay? And I'm absolutely not going to touch Rule 8 in this conversation today, but just to give you kind of a correlation of where things are going. So as you fast forward, right now we're dealing with a pretty major fork in the road right now. For your biggest schools in the college, your Power 4 conferences, the SEC, the Big 12, the Big 10, and the ACC, they are in process of negotiating the ability to provide a revenue share to those student athletes that play at those 4 conferences. So just think about that. So if you play at one of those schools, you now get a piece of the pie. Never happened. Now that'll start in 26. Okay? And so they're going to pay a back penalty of about $2.7 billion, billion with a B, in back pay. And then moving forward, they're working on, between men's and women's basketball and football and some of the Olympic sports, they're negotiating about a $22 million a year salary cap. I would guess that about 75 to 80% of that will go to football because it's where the revenue is at. So how many football coaches we have in the room? I've got a few. Anticipate a school like Oklahoma State, as an example, their salary cap for just the revenue off the television contract will be about $15 million that they're distributing to their players. Okay, so we're all in the wrong profession because we need to get more eligibility. Okay, because those guys are going to make some good quan. All right, now that's just the revenue share, let alone the marketing and the true NIL, and we'll talk a little bit about that in just a minute. Okay, so we're fast forwarding a ton here. We won't get into a lot more on that. All right, so we talked about we're at this absolute fork in the road. Why is that important? Because your kids that are getting recruited, the parents that are in your ear, etc., they're hearing a lot about those 4 conferences. But as we all know, most of your kids will not play at those level of schools. And that's fine. There's tons of great options and opportunities. But this world is changing dramatically, and the policies and the governance for transfers and for NIL has a trickle-down effect. And it's what we watch often to understand the implications of that, what we can do, what we can't do, what policy can be in. If we put this guideline, are we going to get sued or whatnot? Like, we're always looking at these kinds of things. All right, so why does it matter to you? Well, it's important because things are changing quickly in the world of recruiting and NIL very, very dramatically right now. Let's talk about recruiting, okay? Evaluations are now done earlier and differently than they've ever done, especially on the super high end, because now they're looking at evaluations based on, basically it's like a salary cap. I mean, they're looking at how they value that. So does this position on the team, what value do we place on that position, and how much money do we have in the bank? That is a very different process than what they've historically done. So evaluations look differently. We saw about a 25% reduction in high school players going from high school players going to college in the last 4 or 5 years because kids were going into the portal. And so, like all of us, we'd rather a guy have 400 swings at the plate in baseball rather than taking a freshman and putting him out there for the very first time. So the trickle down of that is that affects, Division II, it affects junior college, NAI, Division III, it affects all of that, and it creates a bit of a traffic jam, which then ultimately affects you guys because you're sitting here trying to say, how do I get my kid to the next level, or what can I do to help them get to the next level? So it's created a little bit of a log jam right there. Today, literally an hour and a half, 2 hours before I came on stage, the NCAA approved roster caps. Anybody see that today? All right, so the roster, some sports kind of operated this way, but a true roster cap is now being implemented. So in football, they're going to cap it at 105 players. Okay? In baseball, they're going to cap it at 34 players. In volleyball, they're going to cap it at 18. In men's and women's basketball, it's now going to be capped at 15. Okay? Now, that may not seem like a big deal, but if you were a football program at a major college, you might carry 115, 120 players. So you'd have like your scholarship guys, you might have some preferred walk-on guys, and you might have a few extras, right? Now they're capping that. So they're going to reduce the amount of, let's say, opportunities for kids to play. At the same time, so you're like, oh, that kind of sucks. Yeah, kind of sucks. The flip side of that is they've increased the scholarships when they did that, boys and girls. So now football, instead of 85 scholarships at Oklahoma State or at Tulsa, those coaches now in the 26th season will have 105 scholarships in football. That's an increase of 20. In basketball, they will increase from 13 to 15. In softball, they will go from 12 to 25. And so you think about it, okay, there's pros and cons. Think about the unintended consequences of that movement. If you're a kid right now and you are I'm just using scenarios, and you're going to school at the University of Arkansas and you finished your first year as a preferred walk-on or maybe a walk-on the football team, are you going to have a roster spot? Or are they going to go take another scholarship guy and replace you? Okay? Or if you've got a high-performing high school kid who's maybe that tweener, maybe needs a little bit push, but they take him as a reach kid, do they take that kid or do the rich get richer? Okay, so these are all the dynamics that we're dealing with right now when it comes to recruiting. And ultimately, that then, as they recruit, they're thinking about a salary cap, but they're also thinking about, they're basically building out what's been called a collective. It's really just a marketing agency. And it's an on-campus marketing agency to monetize their name, image, and likeness. So again, this is the context that you're all in. All right, I'll go forward here just in the sake of time. Transfer portal. You guys all have heard this terminology. All it means in the college space is they had a certain amount of exemptions. Now they're allowing a one-time transfer policy. It's kind of like what the OSSA basically did, which is great. Okay, so it gives a little bit of player freedom. Okay, problem is we're seeing a ton. So you can see some statistics there. About 3,800 names in the transfer portal. That's 1 in 3 kids this last year at the Division I level. Okay, so it's a little bit of an epidemic. It's not quite as bad at the Division II level and Division III level, but that high end, there's just a ton of free agency movement. I feel like you're also going to see the portal windows shorten or shrink, so that'll be really significant moving forward. All right, this is what, I won't spend a ton of time. This is how they value players. It's important that you guys understand if you're talking to a high-end kid and they're going down this path, they're probably going to have an agent moving forward. Yes. If you have a high-end Division I kid right now, I'm talking about a Power 4 kind of kid, they will have an agent even in high school. If you haven't seen it, we're seeing the agent agreements. I can promise you they're here in Oklahoma. So for those high-end kids in men's and women's basketball and in football, for sure, they will have an agent. Okay, then they will be signing some sort of an agreement with them. Okay, so and then the collectives are then certainly valuing them. All right, so what's the difference? We talked a lot about college, but there is some uniquenesses about high school NIL, and I think it's really important. We'll pivot a little bit more that way now rather than recruiting. So on the left, as you can see, all the craziness that's happening in college: collectives, revenue sharing, logo usage, disclosure, meaning they have to turn in the information into a compliance department. All of that exists in college. None of you guys have a compliance office right now. The OSSA, which I think is wise, has said no logo usage for your student athletes. That's really to protect you guys and your school and your marks at your school. But we're seeing more of a need for schools to think about disclosure. Why is that important? A, it'll protect you and do a little bit of CYA for any of your internal movement at the high school level. So back to Rule 8, that will help you if you disclose and make sure that you know what your kids are getting and what they're doing for proof of performance. But you also now have a rule, if you didn't know this, you now know it, is that your kids have to disclose any NIL deals that they did in high school. They have to disclose that the school that they sign with. Anybody know that? No? Okay, that is actually an NCAA rule now. So if they get any NIL business over $600 in high school and they sign with Oklahoma State, Arkansas, whatever, they have to disclose that. It means they have to provide documentation to that. Okay? I don't think most schools know that, and I don't think most of your kids know that now. Okay? So not only do they have to sign up at the eligibility center and disclose all that information, this is one extra step. Okay? So again, lots of changes. You have 35 states now. Florida went green today with their policy, so you'll have literally almost every state that is allowing NIL today. We're seeing it all across the state of Oklahoma, there's some really cool and fun and great opportunities, whether it's trade, endorsements, signings, all sorts of different things. So it's absolutely happening here. So don't think it's not happening here. I can promise you it's happening all over the state of Oklahoma today. All right. Policy today, this is a bit difficult to read. I'll cover it very, very quickly so that everybody understands. Policy today is a pretty simple one. A, if a student athlete wants to do NIL, they absolutely can. Can't do any endorsement with your logo on it. Okay, can't have the bird, the chicken, anything. Can't have the school name, can't have anything in the endorsement. Okay, so if they do a social media post, which is going to be about 90% of the activation, if they do a signing event, can't do any. If they do any of that stuff, just tell them to wear a white polo. Like, they cannot have any of their logo gear on there. Okay, that's the biggest one. If they do a brand endorsement, they can't do it at your facility. They can't do it in the gym. They can't do it at the football stadium. They can't do it in the classroom. They can't do anything on your campus. That is to protect you guys as coaches, because your brand, your school's brand, your district's brand has policies and it has intellectual property, and you have brands that you're already associated with. So if your stadium or your school has a big deal with the bank in the city and a kid does a deal with, Bank of Oklahoma, that could be in conflict of that. So we're trying to protect you guys by not utilizing your logos or brand. Okay. So again, those are the big ones, and that doesn't matter. That same applies for both cash that they would get or trade. So we see a lot of trade deals where somebody wants to give a kid golf clubs. That's a popular one. Golf is a really popular one. Or gear, shoes, bats, gloves. All that's awesome. Still counts. Still can't use any of their logos or their endorsements. They can have their, what school are you guys from, Coach? They can still have their name of their school in their social bio. That's fine, but just can't put any active post out on any of those social platforms. Okay, those are the big ones. Okay, certainly some caveats that we can talk about. The other big things, again, applies to, you can't broker a deal. And so, you can't be a street agent. If you have the local Allstate rep that says, Coach, we want to help your program. Great, help your program. If he wants to make a gift and give you guys $10,000, awesome. Give it to the program. Don't give it to your kids. If you give it to your kids, then you're brokering that. If you give it to the program and you want to get sweats and gear and all that, that's great. Do that all day long. That's awesome. Once you guys to fundraise, all of you guys are master fundraisers, so that continue that. The other thing I would tell you, and I will go on record this, I've spoken to, dozens of schools right now, is well, if the colleges have collectives, can we do that at our school? I get this a lot from high school coaches. There's technically no rule against it. But I would tell you, and I will go on record, and I'm happy to talk to anybody about this. The day that you start a collective, get your resume ready to go. Because you will get fired. Think about it. How many of you have a hard enough time getting parents to run the popcorn machine for your concession stands? Is that a problem? For a few of you, like just getting people to run the gate and the ticket booth and concession stands? Imagine that same parent paying your girls' basketball players, for God's sakes. Okay, that is what you would be set with. Okay, so again, it's a little contentious, and I know I'm being a little overt with my statements there. I think it's a dumpster fire waiting to happen. So I would just tell you, talk to your AD, counsel with some other people before you go down that path. I haven't seen anybody in the state of Oklahoma doing a collective, and I would absolutely tell you, I think you're right for problems. We can't tell you not to because we get sued. But I think it's right for problems in the high school market. I'll just tell you, there will be. Okay. So again, happy to talk to anybody about that. All right. So that is it. What have we seen so far? Apparel deals. We've seen autograph signings. We've seen brand ambassadors, influencers. We've seen agents involved in NIL in high school. We've seen apparel deals, kickbacks, social promotions. All of this is happening all over the state. You'd be surprised. Big schools and small schools and everything in between. Here are a couple of examples. The one on the right is Trade. Girl at Piedmont plays softball. She got bats and gear, and that's awesome. Good for Tabor. She does a great job on social media. I follow her. She does an awesome job. This is totally legit. Everything on here is good for both these girls. The one on the right is Trade. The one on the left, girl at Broken Arrow, good. She's got a PT clinic. She did an endorsement deal there. She's got their gear on. She did a couple of social posts. That's great. Nothing's wrong with that. Okay, so the one on the left is a cash deal. The one on the right is a trade deal. Both NIL. Both need to be disclosed. Nothing's wrong with either of those. It says nothing about the school. I know it's hard to read with the projector here, but this is good. So this is happening all day long, all over the state of Oklahoma, and literally all over the country right now. We just saw a major Division I recruit do a trading card deal last week. Some crazy stuff. So those high-end kids, right, they're going to get some really unique opportunities. I call it kind of the Trae Young. That's the Trae Young model. Trae Young would have been making more than probably all of us combined when he was playing in high school, as an example. All right, I'm almost done. Athletic directors in the room, coaches in the room, have a checklist. Make sure you are training your parents and student athletes on NIL. I would post the rules that are on the OSSA website in your locker rooms. I would go through it in your parent recruiting meeting on the changes that are happening in recruiting and high school NIL, and make sure you cover off on that. Okay. I would have policy in place at the district level for your athletic directors as well. And then think about what you want to disclose. Okay. And this is really important. I think over the next couple of years, you're going to hear a lot about this. You may say, this is not my responsibility, but I will tell you, you've got a lot of parents and student athletes, as they do more here, they're going to have more paperwork, and there's going to become more of a paper trail around disclosures. Okay. Last but not least, think about it. We've seen evolving work in rosters right now. We talked about that in recruiting. We've seen a changing landscape in NIL. The rules are dynamic, certainly happening often right now. Think about a social media policy as far as training around social media, because most of the activation is coming off of social media. So that's certainly just a couple of things to kind of keep in mind. If I can help, we talk to coaches and athletic directors and train on this. I gave you like the 20-minute version of NIL and recruiting. If I can help in any way, come up, find me, send me a note. Thanks for the time.